Please welcome Rolf Hausamann of Swisscom and Dinshar Sidar of ING Wholesale Banking, a word I always struggle with, for our panel about the best ways to balance user experience and security for consumer identity management. And that aligns with talks we heard, for instance, from Rolf Hausamann already. It also links back to my keynote I gave in the morning. And I think it's about one of the biggest challenges we are facing when doing consumer identity solutions, because at the end we need to have a certain degree of security, but security has a huge potential to annoy people if not done right, and to increase drop-off and churn rates, which we obviously want to avoid. So what I'd like to ask the two of you is to quickly introduce yourself and maybe come up with a first initial statement you see around this theme of this panel. Rolf, do you want to start?
Thank you, Martin. Yes, please. I'm in charge at Swisscom at AIM for the consumer domain, for the business domains, and also indirect sales channels. I developed a vision with my team, putting that in place, and it's going to be focusing on the identity, and we want to make Swisscom user-centric, because I believe the ID as such has a value, and it's an enabler for much more business, cross-selling, upselling, and the great new user experience, but it's also crucial for a good security that you leverage on the ID and all the means that come with it in terms of increasing security.
Okay, Dinshar?
Yes, thank you for having me, Martin. I'm working as a customer journey expert at ING Wholesale Bank. My job is basically to design and implement easy and secure login and consent customer journeys for ING's corporate clients. And if I come up with a statement, I believe this CX is the new era, is where the battlefield is happening right now, especially among banks, and offering the right balance between security and CX, the UX, will be always a challenge, but I really enjoy working in this area.
Okay, so thank you. And so when we look at what is happening today, so you come from a little different industries. On one hand, telco, on the other hand, banks, and I think every one of us also has a lot of experience with all other types of industries, more or less in the daily life, from whatever renting or buying cars to e-commerce to utility companies you have to deal with. And so I think that the good thing for that topic in some ways, everyone has some experience, but on the other hand, you, and to some extent maybe also me, we are also experts from the other side of the story. So we might have a slightly different look at some of the things we are facing than others have. So when you look at the main problems, what do you see as the major challenges today? Dinshar, do you want to start?
Yes. I think the biggest challenge for traditional identity and access management solution is that many companies are still offering username and password for authentication.
Nothing else.
Yeah, and that's I think in this point of time, it's not acceptable anymore, especially for critical sectors such as banking, we can say, or telco in that case. Or so I think we have to move away from username password very quickly. And of course, when we move away, the first solution comes into mind is multi-factor authentication. That also has some downsides because, for instance, for banks, it means in general a card and reader, or a hardware device that you have to carry with you wherever you go, just to access an online banking platform. And of course, we see that it's slowly, or it's quite, let's say, we see the transition from a hardware token to software solutions or mobile apps, let's say, more generic. But still, I think the transition will continue for a while. And another problem I see is for multi-factor authentication, we always forget that the enrollment actually defines the security level of the multi-factor authentication solution. So if you enroll for username and password. In the end, it's actually a one factor, but that's not very well communicated, I think, from the companies, and I think users' awareness are still lacking.
Okay,
in that
thank
sense.
you. What would be your perspective on that?
First of all, I share the views of Zidar, and I'm just adding a few points, particularly on the telco market, or actually in all markets. It shouldn't be a hurdle, right? Making it secure, you increase the hurdle, which is not good in an online shift if you want to have easy experience for the user. However, we've also made the experience that silent login, so a non-visible security measure, is not good for the user as well, because some people might be concerned that their data is not protected, even we do it in the background. So the idea is, for me, is just above the radar, slightly visible for the user, but really easy, 1 or 2 clicks and it's done. So that's where we should all working towards, but it's not easy, right? Password is one critical point. It can be forgotten, or it might not just be enough. So what I'm doing is trying to focus and putting the security in place where it's really needed. One example, you're accessing TV on your mobile phone. There needs to be a certain protection, right? It's your recordings, no one should be able to delete them. The company wants to protect IPRs, for example, from the content. That's our obligation. So we need to have a certain login, but we don't need second factor for that, because what you see on the TV is publicly available, so no big worries, right? On the other hand, sensitive customer data, there you definitely want to have it, and there's what we're focusing on. Multi-factor is, of course, a way forward, but adding another perspective to what Dinjar said, in the consumer domain, second factor, multi-factor is really a concern.
Yeah. Isn't it that at the end, the one factor is very clear, because what is the thing, especially in the consumer device, where you don't have to deal with whatever data centers below the ground, where you don't have mobile phone access. But I think we can assume mobile phone access is pretty commonly available. And then the smartphone is, from my perspective, one of the logical factors, because today I think it's more likely that people carry their smartphone around than their wallet. Even so, the smartphone, I think for many, it's the first thing they check: do I have my smartphone with me, before they check for anything else? And so we would have one factor, which we then could complement with another relatively lightweight factor. Isn't it that way?
Correct. And the beauty of it, if you're using the same device, I'm thinking about towards risk-based authentication. So we know your device, you might be an iPhone user or an Android user. We know which version of the software you're using. We know which browser there might be just purely for identification purposes. There might be a cookie in there. So we know it's you, and we also know what you're doing. So we kind of know a pattern. Then if 30 minutes after your last session, suddenly you want to access sensitive data with a device of a different manufacturer that we haven't seen it, and the IP address comes out of South America or Africa, I don't think it's logic that you've traveled that far within a few minutes. There might be something suspicious happening, and we can cut before the damage happens. I think so. By adding different things we know and pulling together that data just for pure authentication purposes, we're actually serving the user, and we're making the world more secure.
And it is something many of us right now do in sort of the everyday life, also on the sort of the employee access side. So when you take whatever typical MFA experience in Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365, at the end there's the device ID used. And you feel, when you switch from one browser to the other, you feel, oh, I have to re-authenticate because the system is right now different. I had to switch the update from old Edge to new Edge, Chrome Edge. And then you have exactly this experience. You have a relatively convenient first factor, so to speak, combined with something which runs in the background. Dinjar, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I actually have a complimentary view on this. Saying that actually up until now, and currently, we are mostly focusing on the initial authentication of the user. The idea is to differentiate a genuine user from the fraudster, right, in the beginning. But we don't really have a monitoring in place in most companies for the continuous authentication, so which is in line with what Rolf also mentioned. So I think I will go one step ahead. Let's say I would like to see in the future no login application, no login procedure at all for the users. This will also have impact for perception of the user, and I think it will evolve over time that people will, because we are so used to having a username, password, or a login application to land in, you don't need that actually, right? If you're a genuine user. So if you go one step ahead, and if we have the right advanced analytics skills, tools available, we can actually monitor.
Yeah, I think I get your point, Incher. You were breaking up a little by the end, but I think your point is we could get rid of every visible authentication. On the other hand, I like the point that Rolf made a few minutes earlier, which was, yes, we could do that. In fact, I think what you said, but we need to be aware of that. The customer might be scared by that because he feels this is totally insecure. So I think that might be a very interesting balance we need to figure out, and maybe also a learning over time. So, and I think a lot of things change over time. When I go back a couple of years, we spent a lot of time talking about why biometrics didn't take up. Right now, every iPhone user uses biometrics, and for a lot of other devices, you also use biometrics every day, and people accepted it. So it really might be a change of that. But I think there are two interesting perspectives, and I like both of them. But Dintra, you also brought up another point at the beginning, which said the one thing is the recurring authentication. The other thing is the initial, at the end, verification, the delivery of the authenticators, which I think with every respect is a challenge and always has been a challenge. So sending out a hardware token or so always was a big logistics effort. So Rolf, what is your perspective then on the on this sort of initial step from verification to setting up the way we authenticate then from there on?
Two different approaches. The benefit in the business, usually you have a means to verify the identity or someone to vouch for. For example, if an ID is generated and we have a relationship with that client, then there is a means to make sure that this person really exists. More tricky on the consumer market. So therefore, I'm making sure that all the channels, when a new individual becomes a client, that we establish an ID at the very first step. Because in the past, people had, a phone access in their house, a bundle, TV, whatever, and then IDs were added on later on. And it's kind of a nightmare to figure out which client and which access, so which ID belongs together. It's a verification process, which is not normally understood by the user. But if you do that from day one, at least the pairing of the product that we sell to the logic ID, that's solved. There's still the matter if there is a regulation compliance that you need to prove that the individual, the natural person behind who that is, and that this person really exists. But that's then, let's say, step 2.
Okay. So let's, in the interest of time, we don't have that much time anymore, and we probably could spend far more time for that panel, I feel. But so when you look at the, so to speak, the don'ts of the thing, so Dintra already brought up the challenge of using username passwords, something I also elaborated on my keynote. Then there are CAPTCHAs, and then there are sometimes these things where you need to say, okay, where do we have or whatever a red light or a car or something in these pictures. So from your experience, what is the worst thing of all these various approaches you could use? So which, from your experience, scares people away most? Richard, do you want to start with a short answer and then Rolf? It looks like Dintra's video is not working. So Rolf, do you want to start?
Yeah, first statement is it really depends on what I want to do, where my level of things that I'm happy to comply with or that I can bear with is, right? So, but in terms of worst experience, when a company introduces as a second factor just a set of static figures, for example, which is nothing else than a second password. If you compromise the first, you compromise the second. So what's the point? I know the CAPTCHAs can be annoying, and I know the photo tans and so on is effort, but maybe I'm compromised personally. I can live with it if I know my data is secure. But it really depends on the user's perspective, what are you protecting, and then make sure it has a certain amount of value, basically.
Okay, Dinshar, we had lost you, so maybe you rephrase or repeat your answer on that.
Yes, I actually totally agree with Rolf. I think the biggest mistake that we as practitioners make is sometimes we are trying to create the most safest or secure solution in the world for our clients, especially in the banking sector. And we add multiple steps, which are, for instance, we have these 3 factors, multiple questions for knowledge-based questions, or it can be multiple devices even. So in the end, you need to think from a theoretical perspective as well. If you are really sure that you have a consistent and a secure factor in place, then you just need to stop there. And you have to also always think from a user perspective, because in the end, you might ruin the experience every day. For instance, for an operations specialist trying to log into your banking platform.
So don't go over the top at the end of the day. And I also believe what is super important is provide alternatives. So having just one way to do it never will be good enough for everyone you need to work with. So I think we need to have these options because there's not the one user with the one type of device. So some things work better for these users, some work better for others. I believe delivering options is a very good thing. And there's nothing in regulations, if you look at PSD2, there's nothing in regulations which inhibit you or prohibit you of providing multiple alternative ways, as long as they are all good enough. So in the interest of time, we are very close to the end. Maybe one closing statement from each of you, and probably at best around, so one sentence around what is the business value of doing it right and better than we commonly do it. Dinshar, do you want to start, and then Rolf?
Yes, I think for me the business value is very clear, but maybe some people might argue with it. So I think the first experience, the first impact that you create on the user is very important. And so let's suppose that you have an amazing nightclub with amazing drinks and music inside, but the way you get into this nightclub and the way you interact with the security guard will really define your whole experience. So if you can create the best experience in the beginning, then the rest will be fine as well.
Rolf, your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, you need to get in easy and so on. But besides the entry door, it's also the chance that if you know the user, you can help to boost the online shift. Digitalization, Corona, just many factors, but it's a great way to deliver the same products with even better quality with less cost. And larger companies or ecosystems have the great chance of doing cross-selling, upselling. If you know your customers, you might have your kids, give them rights to use the service. They are happy to use it. They start putting their data there and so on. As a telco, we see the chance that over the lifetime of this person, once they move out, they already have a custom relationship. Whereas in the old world, they leave the home of their parents and we lose connections with them, right? And we have to acquire a person completely new on a competitive market. So AAM is the way to tie people to a company and to our offering and to the benefit and the experience we deliver.
Yeah, thank you both. We are at the end of the time. I think maybe let's phrase it that way. Verification, registration, authentication, always keep in mind there's no second chance for a first impression. If you do that wrong, you already failed. So thank you very much, Rolf. Thank you very much, Dinshar, and back to Annie.